All right, picture this guy in a top hat, lots of money. He's the bad guy.
Am I real? Or am I just an engram on someone's hard drive? Unable to discern reality from code, all of my reactions pre-programmed and expected by some corpo with an agenda that rivals God.
Hey, the 1800s were pretty cool, weren't they? I think they were pretty cool.
We didn't create the net. It was there, waiting for us. An ancient gate that we stumbled across and projected our subconsciousness into in an attempt at a connection. We failed to realize that the gate works two ways.
All right, so psychological horror, okay? Everybody's British.
Humanity finds itself locked in class warfare that transcends our puny meat and bones. Nano-weave suits and carbon fiber slowly replace our being until we're left asking, who am I? The ship of Theseus was supposed to be a hypothetical and not an aspiration.
Child labor? Pretty efficient if you ask me.
As I look deeper into my subconscious, I start to wonder, where do I begin? And where does the technology end?
Yo, what if, okay, hear me out on this one. We have a soundtrack that sounds like dog shit. Hey, don't forget, we made Treasure Planet. Treasure Planet, Steampunk. You guys remember that? I mean, sure, they're like going to space and shit, but it's that that's Steampunk. That's Steampunk, and that's awesome. That's a great movie, right? Right, guys? Steampunk's awesome. Today, we're going to be shitting on Steampunk. Just kidding, okay? I'm not actually going to be shitting on Steampunk. I'm going to be more so focusing on praising Cyberpunk, okay? Because I feel like whenever we're talking about like the blank punk genres, it feels like every single one is pretty unexplored compared to Cyberpunk. And I think there's a good reason for that. I think that Cyberpunk is very unique in the breadth of themes that it explores, the breadth of aesthetics and inspirations it pulls from, and I think that it is especially relevant to us in the year of 2026. And I think that in comparison, it has a lot more media behind it to investigate. So whenever we're talking about Cyberpunk, we're talking about two main themes. The first one being what happens when technology surpasses our psychology? What happens when technology surpasses our sociology? That's a very difficult question, and it is especially relevant to us. What happens when we have enough technology to turn the planet into the Garden of Eden, but we are still tribal? We are still stuck in a tribalistic mindset. What happens when I have crazy mantis blade wrists and cyberware that can make your head explode, but I still am, I'm a gang member, or I serve the interests of a corporation? That's sort of like the main surface level take of Cyberpunk, but then there is a deeper, more existential side of Cyberpunk that I love when it gets explored. Cyberpunk 2077 actually does a very, very good job at exploring this theme. And that is, what is a soul? What is a human? Where do I begin and the soul begin? Who am I? What am I? This extremely existential framing of cyberpunk is one of the things that makes it so attractive to me as somebody who's super interested in philosophy and stuff like that. I find that whenever you start asking questions about, like, okay, well, if I slowly replace every bit of myself with cyberware, am I still me? Can I ship of Theseus myself out of existence? You know, whether we're talking about like Cyberpunk 2077, where, you know, if I took my brain and I put it into an engram chip, is that still me, or is that something else entirely? Is that just an AI that is pretending to be me? We don't know, and that's the scary thing. Very quickly, when you start talking about the existential themes of cyberpunk, you kind of run into two main, huge philosophical walls. The first one is the hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness is this idea that we only can verify that we are conscious, that I am conscious. That is all I can verify. However, I can't verify that any of you are conscious. I can't verify that my partner is conscious. I can't verify that anybody is consciousness. I kind of just assume because we have similar parts. That's really it. And so when I look at an AI, I say that an AI cannot be conscious because it doesn't have the same parts as me. But you see how that's kind of like an assumption. That's not really a concrete answer. At the end of the day, the most confident I can be is 50-50. There's a 50% chance that it is actually conscious and has a lived experience, a qualia, but there's also a 50% chance that it's just not, and it's just code that is bumping around, and it doesn't actually have an experience like I do. And then the second question is, what is the divine? What is the God? What is spirituality? A soul, if you will. Does a soul exist? Kind of related to the consciousness problem, but again, referencing Cyberpunk 2077. If you couldn't tell, I've been playing a lot of that recently. What is a God? What is the divine? There has to be a relationship between the divine and the digital. And the reason we know this is because of how it connects us. Whether you are reading about spirituality or religion, or maybe you're just learning about the internet, which welcome if you're just learning about the internet, I'm glad you could make it. What is the commonality between all these things? They are intangible, they connect us, they require some level of faith to work. Now, you might think, well, Sean, we're using the internet right now, and I don't have faith in the internet. I just know it works. The reason it works is because we have faith that it works. We're looking at a screen and our brains are assembling it, and there's something between that connection, that there's some sort of magic going on there, or at least that's the assertion that Cyberpunk gives, especially when you start talking about like the idea of like going into the internet and like physically going into the internet somehow and interacting with it. As well, if we merge our bodies with technology, Shipathesia style, then what happens when there are AI that can influence that technology that is inside us? When we marry the biological and the technological, what is that? It's kind of just a fun way of investigating the ideas of belief and investigating the ideas of sort of, what is holy, what is divine, what is the human subconsciousness, and how are we projecting it onto the internet? I want to elaborate. I think that whenever we're talking about sort of this idea of belief and faith required for the internet in the same way that one might need to read the Bible, because at the end of the day, if you are reading a holy scripture, if you are looking at the internet, if you are talking to another person, there's an assembly that is required in your brain, which means that it is perception reliant. I think that when we're talking about faith, what we're talking about a sort of like perception reliant idea, an idea that requires you to believe in it first. I think that when we talk about the internet, I think we're kind of talking about a representation of the human subconsciousness. At least that's sort of my takeaway of the cyberpunk genre, because I think that that is kind of the idea that is being explored a lot of the time, and I feel like that's such an interesting concept. I don't know. I could be delusional. You can let me know in the comments if I'm just being fucking crazy right now. But genuinely, I think that there's a very interesting interrogation of faith and ideas like, the divine present in cyberpunk that I feel like is just super interesting to talk about and engage with. Okay, I promised I wasn't going to shit on steampunk too much, but I'm going to a little bit. I'm going to also shit on a few other punk genres, so I apologize in advance. With the exception of diesel punk, okay, because diesel punk is my baby. I wrote a book about diesel punk. I'll put a link to it in the description, and you can go buy it on Amazon or Kindle or whatever. But steampunk feels a little small narratively. I don't see a lot of meaningful delineation in the steampunk genre or meaningful questions being asked. You get a lot of bourgeoisie versus proletariat and like action adventure type stuff, and that's really it. I don't find that there are any deeper existential questions. You can explore the proletariat versus bourgeoisie aspect, but it feels like that's kind of one note, and I feel like gets done a lot. I don't mind a Marxist analysis of like, sort of class relations. And I feel like steampunk can be a good genre for that. But I just feel like it's a little tired at this point. My main critique of a lot of other punk genres is it just feels like there's not a lot of media behind them. In steampunk, I can think of a couple good steampunk properties like Treasure Planet or Bioshock Infinite. That's pretty cool. I don't know. It just feels like it's sort of unexplored. The Eberron setting in Forgotten Realms is pretty cool, I guess. It feels like it's lacking, and then like you have a bunch of other one note genres like arcane punk, which exists because of arcane, more or less. Another shout out to steampunk would be Dishonored. I think you could count that as steampunk, and that's pretty fucking awesome. Not gonna lie to you. I guess it's debatably diesel punk. I don't know. I'm not gonna argue about that. You get a whole bunch of these other genres that are kind of like unexplored, like aether punk or solar punk or I don't know, gore punk, I guess, which are cool in their aesthetic, but they don't seem to be asking a lot of the reader or viewer. It doesn't feel like there's any questions that are being asked that challenge me as a reader. Again, I would love to get recommendations down in the comments because I'm not the most well explored in a lot of these genres. This is just over the 24 years of media exploration that I have. I feel like I am not inspired by other genres like I am cyberpunk. So leave me a comment down below recommending me some other punk things, and I'll explore them as I can. So that'll be all for today's video. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Be safe.